Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake is finally here, and after watching the announcement trailer, one thing became immediately clear. This is not the Code Veronica most fans remember. The OG was known for its over-the-top villains, bizarre moments, and larger-than-life characters, but this trailer feels much different. The remake seems more darker, more grounded, and more focused on horror than spectacle. And the further you dig into the footage, the more interesting things become, because hidden throughout this trailer are subtle changes to the story, the characters, and even the tone of the original game. Changes that could completely reshape how Code Veronica is remembered. So today we're breaking down every major reveal, every hidden detail, and the biggest clues that might tell us where Capcom is taking the remake. So guys, without further ado, let's begin. Right off the bat, one of the biggest surprises in the trailer happens in the opening scene, because if you played the original Code Veronica, you know Claire's story begins very differently. In the original game, Claire is already infiltrating Umbrella's Paris facility when the opening cutscene starts. She's quickly discovered, chased by Umbrella guards, and eventually captured before being sent to Rockfort Island. But in the remake, Capcom is taking a completely different approach. Instead of immediately throwing Claire into an action sequence, the trailer opens with something much quieter. Claire arrives at what appears to be Claire Redfield's apartment, still searching for her brother after the events of Resident Evil 2. And already, this gives the remake a much more grounded tone. Rather than starting with explosions and guards chasing her through a facility, we're seeing Claire investigate Chris's disappearance in a more personal way. Here, she's not attacking Umbrella, but she's simply looking for family. Now after arriving at the building, Claire rings for the landlord, who greets her and brings her up to Chris's room on the 3rd floor. And during this moment, the landlord makes a funny comment about Chris being a very strange person. But the real joke comes when they enter the room, because when the old lady notices damage on the floor, she quickly makes a comment about it looking like a boulder rolled through the apartment.
It's like a boulder rolled through here.
And of course, that is almost definitely a callback to one of Chris's most infamous moments in Resident Evil 5, where he punches a massive boulder out of the way during the final battle. It's a small joke, but it's a really fun nod for longtime fans. And the room itself has even more references hidden inside. One of the biggest is what appears to be a portrait connected to the Spencer mansion, the location where Chris first encountered the horrors of Umbrella during the original Resident Evil. And then there's the gameplay perspective, because this opening appears to be shown in first person. That immediately raises a huge question. Is Code Veronica Remake going to follow the same direction as Resident Evil Requiem, where players can switch between first and third person? Because if that's the case, that would be a massive change. The Resident Evil remakes have been built around third-person gameplay, but this trailer seems to suggest that Capcom will be using both perspectives. And if the entire game can be played in either first or third person, that would completely change how Rockfort Island feels. First person would make the prison, the Ashford residence, and the Antarctic facility feel way more claustrophobic and terrifying. And third person would keep that classic remake feel fans are used to. So if Capcom really is giving players both options, that might be one of the biggest changes revealed in the trailer. But then we get what might be the biggest surprise in the entire trailer, because when Claire looks out of the room, she's suddenly grabbed by none other than the Grim Reaper himself, Hunk. And this was yet another shocking surprise, because if you've played the original Code Veronica, you'll know Hunk is barely involved in the story at all. In fact, most players probably don't even know he has any connection to the game. His involvement was mostly limited to background lore, where he was assigned to transport a mysterious container from Umbrella's Antarctic transport terminal to Rockfort Island. The mission itself was considered unusually risky, because Alfred Ashford refused to tell Hunk or his team what was actually inside the container. And that was basically it, a small piece of lore hidden away in files. But now, Capcom appears to be massively expanding his role. Instead of transporting some random cargo, Hunk now seems to be directly involved in Claire's capture, personally escorting her to Rockfort Island where the events of the game begin. And honestly, I think this is a really smart change, because now Capcom has an opportunity to make Claire's transition of being captured feel much more natural while also giving Hunk a meaningful role in the story. What's even more interesting is Hunk's connection to Rockfort Island itself. Long before becoming Umbrella's legendary operative, Hunk actually received part of his military training on Rockfort Island. It's a small detail from the lore, but it means he's not just some random soldier being sent there. He already has a history with the location, and that makes you wonder just how far Capcom plans to take this character. Because for years, fans have been begging Capcom to do more with Hunk. He's easily one of the most popular characters in the franchise, despite barely appearing in the main story. And after what happened with Resident Evil 9, small spoiler warning, but where he seemingly returned at the Ark facility to battle Leon, it feels like Capcom is finally starting to bring him back into the spotlight. But the big question though is, how involved will he actually be? Will he simply capture Claire and disappear? Will he become a recurring threat throughout the game? Could Capcom even be setting up a boss encounter? Personally, I think he'll mostly serve as a narrative bridge between Paris and Rockfort Island. The original story was always Claire's story, and I don't think Capcom wants Hunk overshadowing that. Transitioning away from the opening cutscene, the trailer begins showing us our first glimpses of Rockfort Island itself, and honestly, this is where the remake starts feeling very different from the original. One of the first shots we see is a dense forest shrouded in fog and darkness. Now I could be wrong here, but I genuinely don't remember anything quite like this from the original. It's possible this is simply a reimagined version of an existing area, but it could also be an entirely new section created specifically for the remake. And even in these brief shots of the island, the atmosphere feels completely different. The original game certainly had its horror elements, but it was also known for its over-the-top tone and larger-than-life moments. This trailer feels much more focused on creating tension and dread. The fog is thicker, and the lighting is dim, and just based off the small clips, the island itself feels isolated in a way the original never quite captured. And then we get to one of the most interesting shots in the entire trailer, the ants. At first glance, it seems like a random horror shot, but if you've played Code Veronica, you know that it's anything but random. Because ants are deeply connected to the game's virus T. Veronica and the Ashford family's research, with the Ashfords being the main villains of the game. In the original, Alexia Ashford's experiments were heavily inspired by ant colony behavior, particularly queen ants. In fact, the T. Veronica virus itself was developed using genetic material derived from an ancient queen ant that had been preserved for centuries. And as strange as that sounds, it becomes a major part of Code Veronica's story. Near the end of the original game, players discover a massive ant colony hidden within the Antarctic base, the very place where Alexia conducted much of her research. By that point, the connection between the virus and insect biology becomes impossible to ignore. And what's interesting is that the virus doesn't just draw inspiration from insects, it actually causes insect-like mutations. And nowhere is that more apparent than Alexia herself. As her infection begins to progress, many of her abilities and transformations begin resembling those of insects, from her movements and attacks to the increasingly grotesque form she takes during the final stages of the game. So, this small ant seed is undoubtedly planting seeds for Alexia and the T. Veronica virus long before they're officially revealed. Next, we get a very brief shot of what appears to be a deceased guard, and while it's only on screen for a moment, it immediately caught my attention. This could possibly be hinting at a more in-depth showcase of Rockfort's fall. For those who haven't played the original, the outbreak was triggered when Albert Wesker and his forces launched an assault on the facility while searching for the T. Veronica virus. The attack caused widespread destruction, security systems failed, bioweapons escaped containment, and the entire island quickly descended into chaos. The problem is, we never actually got to see any of it happen. By the time the original game begins, the damage has already been done. Claire wakes up in a prison cell after the attack, and we're left to piece together what happened through files, environmental storytelling, and a few brief explanations. But this remake might be changing that. If Capcom is expanding the opening and adding new story sequences, there's a real possibility we'll actually witness parts of the island's downfall unfold in real time. Imagine seeing Wesker's forces attack the facility, Umbrella soldiers desperately trying to contain escaping bioweapons, and even prisoners breaking free as the island falls apart around them. Not only would that make the outbreak feel far more impactful, but it would also give players a much stronger understanding of just how catastrophic the situation really was. Next, we get a glimpse of one of the most iconic weapons in Code Veronica, the dual gold Lugers. And then, we potentially see its wielder, none other than Steve Burnside himself. Now the shot is brief, but the hairstyle looks incredibly similar to his original appearance, making it highly likely that this is our first look at the character. And honestly, Steve may end up being one of the biggest beneficiaries of this entire remake. For those unfamiliar with the original game, Steve was a teenager imprisoned on Rockfort Island after his father attempted to sell Umbrella secrets. Following the outbreak, he escapes captivity and eventually crosses paths with Claire. The two spend much of the game working together as they attempt to survive the island and escape its horrors. The problem is that Steve has always been one of the most divisive characters in the franchise, not because his story was bad, but because the execution didn't always land. His backstory is actually incredibly tragic, but despite this, many players only remember Steve for his awkward dialogue, exaggerated reactions, and some of the most frustrating moments throughout the game. And that's exactly why I'm excited to see what Capcom does with him, because if Capcom can do for Steve what they did for Luis in RE4 Remake, he could end up becoming one of the strongest characters in the entire game, and this would honestly be one of the biggest improvements that the remake could make. Next, we get our first look at the Ashford residence and Alfred Ashford himself, one of the strangest villains in Resident Evil history. Now, if you played the original Code Veronica, you'll know Alfred is impossible to forget. He's eccentric, unpredictable, and completely obsessed with the Ashford family legacy. Throughout the game, Alfred serves as one of Claire's primary antagonists, constantly pursuing her while acting as the self-proclaimed ruler of Rockfort Island. But beneath all the theatrics is a genuinely tragic character. Alfred grew up under enormous pressure as a member of one of Umbrella's founding families. Unfortunately for him, he spent his entire life living in the shadow of his twin sister Alexia, who was considered a genius from an incredibly young age. While Alexia was praised and admired, Alfred constantly struggled with feelings of inadequacy and failure. Over time, that obsession completely consumed him. And that's what makes this remake so exciting, because while Alfred was certainly memorable in the original game, a lot of his scenes leaned heavily into the over-the-top side of Resident Evil. For some fans it worked, but for others it made it difficult to take him seriously as a villain. For the remake, instead of portraying Alfred as simply an over-the-top antagonist, Capcom may be leaning much harder into his deteriorating mental state and his unhealthy obsession with Alexia. Now Capcom has the opportunity to fully explore the downfall of the Ashford family and make Alfred genuinely terrifying rather than simply bizarre. And if they pull that off, Alfred could end up receiving the same treatment Luis got in RE4 Remake, a character that fans remembered, transformed into a character fans genuinely loved. And that was everything Capcom showed us in the announcement trailer. But honestly, I think what's most interesting is what they didn't show. There was no Claire Redfield, no Albert Wesker, and no Alexia Ashford. Capcom is definitely holding a lot back. But despite being around 4 minutes long, this trailer feels less like a story trailer and more like a tone setter. Its job wasn't to reveal every major character or spoil the biggest surprises, but instead show fans what kind of remake this is going to be. And based on what we've seen so far, it looks like Capcom is taking Code Veronica in a much darker, more grounded, and more horror-focused direction than the original. They're expanding Claire's story, they're bringing back Hunk, and maybe even showing us parts of Rockfort Island's downfall that we never got to see in the original. If that's the case, then this remake can end up being much more than a visual upgrade, but time will only tell. But let me know what you guys think about this reveal. What was your favorite thing from the trailer? What changes do you want to see? And what are you hoping Capcom doesn't touch? Personally, I cannot wait to see Chris and Wesker, because if this announcement was anything to go by, the best reveals are still ahead of us. And if you want a full refresher on Claire's story before Code Veronica, then be sure to click this video here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.